Republicans joined Democrats in voting to rein in Trump's military action. I want to bring in MS Now's Kevin Fry on the Hill. Kevin, what happened?
Yeah, Steph, look, I mean, this is the same 4 Republicans that joined with Democrats the last time the House passed one of these resolutions, which is several weeks ago. But, of course, this is notably coming after we saw this renewed escalation in the conflict just over the weekend in that a handful of U.S. service members who were killed as part of this. Now, of course, this isn't necessarily going to come with any form of teeth to it, because as we know, the one that passed a few weeks ago, it passed in both the House and the Senate, but it didn't actually have to, and this is all in the procedural mumbo-gumbo, but it didn't actually have to get signed off by the president. So its legal enforceability is very much in question. Nonetheless, it, of course, allows Democrats to send a message, especially heading into the midterms, especially heading right into the August recess, that Republicans are okay with this war and they're willing to give the president unfettered power to go ahead. The Senate is also expected to be voting on a similar resolution in the next hour, so we will see we'll have a chance to see if any additional Republicans will join on that side with Democrats to try to put some constraints on this war. Within the last week, we have already seen Democrats here on the Hill transition to a new strategy to try to put a check here by, for example, voting against the annual defense bill, trying to derail extra funding for the Defense Department as a way to put other guardrails on this conflict. So Democrats are kind of coming to the realization that the war powers alone are not going to cut it if they want to put an end to this conflict.
Kevin, thank you. All right, reining in some presidential power.
Yeah, well, and I think the key phrase there isn't much teeth to this. I think, you know, and would Donald Trump pay attention to this? You know, he's not really into checks and balances these days. This war is about as popular as Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. You know, he's down in the low 30s in terms of approval ratings. And I think 2/3 of the country is against this war right now. That's why those Republicans crossed over and joined the Democrats. It's, you know, this is about the only way they can pass legislation these days is when the Republicans join the Democrats on something that's pretty popular, like reining in Trump. But this war is getting more and more unpopular. And as you were saying earlier, you know, there is some talk that maybe he could wrap this up by the fall. You know, how many times have they said this?
We've been hearing that. When do we hear it? Every Sunday night before the market opens on Monday.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, I think, you know, as I said, from the perspective of younger people, I think this needs to be further humanized beyond kind of the gas prices. There was a young veteran I sat with a couple of weeks ago who had to choose. He went back to Texas to work in his parents' restaurant. He cut his hand in the kitchen. He had 9 stitches. He had to choose between anesthesia, which was separate than the stitches, and his rent. $800. So he told me he raw dogged it. Okay? Oh. That's a veteran. Wow. That's someone who volunteered to serve our country, just like the 20 veterans every single day. We talked about, you know, your family's history, Dan, who lose their lives by suicide. Like, this is what's happening. And when we cavalierly talk about not just the young men and women who passed away this week, who died this week, but the 100 or so with potentially brain injuries since the 4th of July.
Just to be clear, there was no suicide in my family. We were talking about my dad's service in the Army. I just want to be really clear about that. And, you know, I think it's really important, as you mentioned, John, the human element of this, and then we go back to the economic element or the political element. You know, a lot of these Republican congresspeople, they have to go back into their districts, right? And this is going to happen in the next couple of weeks. And is it that they separate themselves? Do they put more sort of sunlight between the policies that are going on here, especially when you have something like that passes? You know, this could be a very interesting time as we know once we get to Labor Day, it's over. It's a sprint, you know, towards the midterms. And I think a lot of stuff that happens over the next 5-6 weeks is really going to be determinant of, you know, how this kind of, you know,
then help us with this, Liz. Obviously, everything around this war is not winning for this president. So he's now diverting our attention and taking us back to tariffs. Okay, his top trade negotiator said the strategy is not changing. It is full steam ahead. The Supreme Court may have shot them down. We're going to look for a new way to implement them. Who, at this point, is the voting base who's saying right on? Because the argument early on where he said, this is America first, we're going to bring manufacturing jobs back, even if he could sell that last year, we now have a year's worth of data where manufacturing jobs have dropped, jobs across the board have dropped. Who is he making this argument to that it's winning for? Not businesses, not consumers, not the American voter.
Yeah, and it's similar to the Iran war. No one asked for the Iran war. No one is asking for these tariffs, and they undermine two of his key campaign promises: no more wars, and I'm going to tackle prices. And there's a direct line between this war, between the tariffs, and prices going up. And if you look at certain states where we have very big elections this year, Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Maine, that does a lot of trade with Canada. Both Michigan and Maine do. They're being hit very, very hard by these tariffs. And Democrats might not be super popular in all these places, as we discussed before, but they can make the point that, hey, the Republican over here, has he stood up to the president on Iran? Has he stood up to the president on tariffs? Usually they haven't.
All right, there's more breaking news. The House of Representatives has just voted to restrict President Trump's Iran war powers. This is a significant development. CNN's Lauren Fox is joining us from Capitol Hill. Lauren, I understand 4 Republicans, yes, 4 Republican members of the House voted with all the Democrats, basically, to rebuke the president's handling of this war with Iran.
Yeah, this is a very significant rebuke of the president and his actions in Iran, especially after tensions with that country have escalated over the last several weeks. What you saw today was 4 Republicans joining Democrats in making the case that they believe Congress needs to weigh in on this conflict. And that included Representative Thomas Massie, Brian Fitzpatrick, Tom Barrett, and Warren Davidson. These are the same 4 Republicans, we should note, that voted back in June to rebuke the president's war powers in Iran as well. Now, we expect that in just a short time, the Senate is also going to take up a separate war powers resolution. But even if it passed both chambers, these resolutions do not have the force of law. What they do is they send a signal to the White House, to the administration, that they are registering their discontent with what the president has done. And I will tell you that over the course of the last several days, as I've been talking to Republicans, it does seem very clear that as they leave town for this month-long recess, as they're campaigning back home, they recognize that this kind of conflict in the Middle East is very damaging for them in their re-elections, especially as we've seen gas prices increase over the last several months. But many of these Republicans have argued this is simply about the fact that Congress should have a say, that this is an important branch of government, that they should have a say in this escalating conflict, and that they believe that the White House at this point has gone too far. We should note just one more time, it was 4 Republicans joining Democrats on this vote today in the House.
Important for the Senate to get this right.
The question I personally get over and over and over again from our viewers is, what can Congress do? And what is Congress doing? And I think this morning you helped offer an answer to that. The House voted to adopt your war powers resolution to limit the president's actions in Iran. You had 4 Republicans who joined Democrats to help pass that. Still, it still has to clear the Senate, which right now is voting on a procedural step to advance a different war powers resolution. What are your expectations?
Well, my expectation is that our Republicans develop a spine, a conscience, and stand up for their constituents and for the country. This is clearly an illegal and unconstitutional war. It is costing U.S. service members' lives, 18 already, who have lost their lives. It is costing taxpayers tens of billions of dollars at minimum. It is driving up the cost of gas and groceries, and it is creating chaos, havoc, and putting innocent civilian lives at risk around the region. So this war needs to end. We will keep putting forward war powers resolutions because it is important that Congress reclaim our authority. We have the sole authority to declare war. We have not done that. And the president has already turned up his nose at the last war powers resolutions that passed the House and the Senate. We will, of course, pursue other avenues, including legal avenues, to enforce these war powers resolutions. But the Republicans, and, I'm grateful to the 4 who stood with every single Democrat to say this war needs to end. We need more of them, and we need them to hold this president accountable for what he is doing.
I do think the movement among Republicans is what is new here, because Democrats have been making the argument on the war powers resolution since this war began. I think part of what you're watching change is actually movement within Trump's own base, his own supporters. Back in May, half of the MAGA base thought continuing the war was worth the economic cost. Now, a new Politico poll finds just over a third do. So that, for those who are not good at math, as I am not, that's a 13-point drop. Your sense if your Republican colleagues beyond those four are feeling that pressure?
They absolutely are, Alicia. And I know that, I brought those same statistics up on the floor when I was debating my war powers resolution yesterday, because I think it is important for these Republicans to contend with the fact that they are enabling an incredibly unpopular war, even amongst Donald Trump voters. So in my conversations with Republicans who did vote with us today, I heard that there was a lot of hand-wringing on the other side. And I would urge you to look not only at the votes from the people who did vote with us, the 4 Republicans who did vote with us, but note that there were a number of Republicans who just didn't show up for the vote. And I think it's because they didn't want to vote no, but they also couldn't bear the thought of standing up to this president and voting yes. So they didn't want to go home to their constituents and say they voted against it, so they just didn't show up for the vote. That, in my mind, is it's not a courageous act. And what we need is people in Congress who are courageous, who will stand up to this president and say what he's doing is illegal and it has to stop. So every time we introduce these war powers resolutions, and there will be more even in September when we come back, we are forcing Republicans to be accountable to their own constituents and to the Constitution.
I'm going to ask our producers to put together a full